Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our fourth webinar in this series presented by DSA4USPS. My name is Claire Ravenscroft. I'm a member of New Orleans DSA and I'll be emceeing our event this afternoon. On behalf
Claire,
of,
wait, I'm sorry.
yeah,
I'm really sorry. Can we just give it like 2 minutes because people are still trickling in?
oh yeah, definitely. Everyone, when you come in, if you want to drop your name in the chat, and if you're a DSA member, what chapter you're part of, and if you're not a DSA member, where you live, and we'll get started in a couple minutes. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and say let's get started. I'm so excited to see so many people in attendance, and especially from all over the country and from Canada and other places as well. That's really awesome. So as I was saying, my name is Claire Ravenscroft. I'm a member of New Orleans DSA, and I'll be emceeing our webinar this afternoon. On behalf of the DSA4USPS committee, I want to thank everyone here for showing up for postal workers and showing up for the future of the Postal Service. And I want to give a special thank you to our three amazing panelists for agreeing to contribute their ideas and experiences to our webinar topic today, the Postal Service and the Green New Deal. Since its introduction by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey in 2019, the Green New Deal has become the gold standard for US federal policy on climate change. The Green New Deal breaks from the usual business-friendly climate agenda to demand a total transformation of US social and economic life. It marries climate adaptation and energy transition to expanded public goods like housing, healthcare, education, and union jobs. And it puts a high priority on working class and non-white communities who are most susceptible to climate change's impacts. In this way, the Green New Deal's appeal and its promise is to fundamentally shift power in the US so that we live in a society that is decarbonized, that is resilient, and that is just, with no one left behind in a climate changing world. Is everyone able to hear me? Yes, okay. The United States Postal Service is often celebrated as a socialist treasure in our otherwise very capitalist country. Everyone in the US, no matter where they live, can send and receive mail on the cheap. More, the USPS employs over 600,000 people, many of them Black, many women, and many veterans, with the kind of stable, well-paid union jobs that the Green New Deal suggests everyone should have, and that DSA is fighting for as part of building working class power in the US. So, how can this socialist treasure contribute to the Green New Deal? How can the Postal Service be a part of the Green New Deal's vision of a just and sustainable society, or even be the Green New Deal's flagship? What measures or policies would this include? And importantly, what would it take to make this happen? Who needs to be involved? And what strategy should we use in order to organize for a win this big and transformative? Previous webinars in this series, put together by DSA4USPS, have discussed the Postal Service's importance to fair elections and a free democracy, as well as the social transformation possible if the USPS were to expand into public banking. And our second webinar highlighted the uniquely radical history of postal worker organizing on race and class equality. I mentioned these other webinars because today's discussion in many ways ties them together. In our webinar on the USPS and elections, we learned that the Postal Service is already exactly the kind of institution needed in the democratic society envisioned by the Green New Deal. In our webinar on postal banking, we learned that the Postal Service can and should be expanded beyond the indispensable work it already does to take on a larger social role. And in our webinar, Black Postal Lives Matter, we learned that through several generations of organizing, postal workers have laid important groundwork for the kind of multiracial working class solidarity needed to actually win the Green New Deal. So today we'll continue this conversation we've been having about not just saving the USPS, but expanding it. And it will also start a new conversation about the USPS and the Green New Deal. I'm so excited to introduce our panelists for this event, who are exactly the right people to discuss these topics. Today we'll hear from, in this order, Stephen Quirke, a rank and file member of the National Association of Letter Carriers and DSA, Julee Sanderson, first National Vice President of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, and David Yao, elected Vice President of the Seattle Area American Postal Workers Union. They've been invited to discuss the questions I've posed, along with anything else related to the Postal Service, climate change, and building an equitable society. And I think I speak for everyone here when I say we're eager to hear what you all have to say. So we'll start with Stephen, then Julee, and then David. And each panelist will have 15 minutes to speak, and then we'll take the remaining time to answer questions at the end. And Stephen, my clock reads 4:14. So you have the floor until around 4:30.
And I'm just going to say one thing. I'm so sorry. I'm not tech savvy for whatever reason. The question and answer feature was not set up. Very sorry. So I'm just going to suggest to people watching to please hold questions until the end and then can put them in the chat. I'm just worried that if you put them in the chat now, we will not, they'll get lost. So just hold your questions until the end, and then we will get to them from the chat.
That sounds good. Okay, Stephen, take it away.
All right. Yeah, thank you all for being here, and thank you especially to Claire and the other DSAers who organized this. I think it's very exciting to be talking about the Green New Deal, especially in this very heavily unionized workforce that still is sort of a stronghold for the working class. I think one of the few remaining that you can really enter with no credentials, no degrees or special training, and actually still get into a comfortable position or get into the middle class, if you want to say it that way. I think that it's the Postal Service is definitely a battleground. There's been these ongoing efforts to privatize it, sell off chunks of it to various organizations, and I think there's kind of like a siege mentality right now where we're sort of just like waiting for the worst to happen. And of course, that's not only in the Postal Service, but I think that's really impacted the feeling and the mood that the unions are in. And it's kind of impacted the willingness to organize. And I think that having something like a Green New Deal, having a vision to actually organize around, a shared idea that the public's really excited about, and that workers can get excited about, it could be really key to just opening up the space to organize and to actually hope for something for the future. So I think that's really, really important. I think what I'd like to do is just describe a little bit of what we've done in Portland. I think that I think probably a lot of us are excited to hear about what's been happening in Canada, because I know they have their own campaign that seems to be much, pretty far along. I've been very curious about how far along it's gotten and what sort of successes they've seen, what obstacles they've run into. But politically, Canada just always seems a little further ahead. And when I looked at the campaign they were running, I was really impressed with just how it looked, the way that they were producing the materials, the messaging. It seemed very, very on point. We've only really done a few things here, but we're just trying to get the ball rolling and start the conversation. And I'm very new, so I want to acknowledge that too. I think both Julie and David have been postal workers for a long time and have been organizing, and are actually union officials. And I'm just a member. And I started 2 years ago, and the first union meeting I went to, I sort of awkwardly was approaching people who I didn't know and getting signatures for the Green New Deal resolution for our state convention. And we got enough signatures to get that considered, and it passed. So that has been sent to the national convention, which the last I heard was canceled because of coronavirus. And in fact, all of our local union meetings have also been canceled. We went from March, I think our last meeting was in March, and then all the way to a month ago, we had our first Zoom meeting. So that's been a pretty big disruption. Official union business has really been paused. And there's broader issues there about, how responsive our official union structure is to grassroots energy at all, or to membership agency or involvement over our own union. Well, I'll sort of set that off till later. So we got this resolution passed saying that that our union, the National Association of Letter Carriers, supports a Green New Deal. And I think that it was Jamie Partridge who wrote that. I helped to get some signatures. There was some discussion in our local union hall. And then, through the process at the state convention, it was passed and then sent to the national. And that really hasn't been considered yet. I don't know what sort of delay we're looking at, but obviously from the perspective of, the environmental crisis, the climate crisis, it's unfortunate to see, just the timeline that these things have to go through. So following that, I wrote a resolution saying that we should have 100% electric vehicles for the mail carriers, and cited the fact that we already support a Green New Deal, cited the fact that where scientists are demanding rapid decarbonization, and that the Postal Service was getting ready to spend what was it? think about $6 billion to replace the vehicle fleet. And if we were going to spend that on polluting vehicles, that just makes no sense. We're going to buy new vehicles anyway. Why sink your money into something that then requires you to pollute for the life of those vehicles? That's just, a really terrible investment. And on the flip side, if we actually converted completely to electric vehicles, while there may be some logistical problems we have to solve immediately, like, well, where do you put charging stations? How do you make sure that rural routes get, as far as they need to get? What's the replacement cost, for batteries? There's certain things you have to look at. It solves a lot of problems for the public. If there's charging stations at every post office, that really eliminates the dilemma for a lot of people where they don't know how to charge their vehicle. They might, not all of us have the money to buy an electric vehicle, but if you do, or if, we get some sort of subsidy from the government, which I think we should have to get this technology online, then you now have a place that you can charge it. It solves a very big problem, both for producers and for people who want to get rid of, their polluting equipment. And to me, that would just be massive. The other thing that the resolution called for is to actually use all the postal property we have to produce renewable energy. So use the rooftops to put up, solar panels, put up windmills, if that makes sense. Just use all the space that we have, use this property, and use, this resource that the public owns, and actually make it part of the solution. And I think the potential of that to sort of transform what is actually possible politically is really massive. I saw this amazing art project a couple of years ago. I was hunting for it and couldn't find it, unfortunately, but it was basically like using World War II style posters and trying to imagine, that we actually had the mobilization to stop climate change that we should have, and that it was sort of, based in that idea of like, we're all pitching in together. We have, our climate victory gardens. Uncle Sam wants you to plant, 100 trees and, take on the fossil fuel menace. And it was really amazing. And, it seems kind of cheesy, like it's hard to fully see how politically we get from where we are to there, but everyone trusts the Postal Service. We're kind of like boring, but also the standard in a way. So if we can make this boring but also patriotic, I think we'll get somewhere. And I think just the potential for having like some basic media projects, like, like interviewing postal workers and ask them, like, what do you think about having solar panels at your post office? What do you think about having electric vehicles? What do you think about, here's another idea, using shipping boxes and actually having them put seeds in those boxes. Like there's this concept that this mushroom fanatic came up with, where you have seeds in every shipping box, and then there's mycelium inside, mushroom roots that live on those tree roots, so that basically if you get a box shipped to you, you can then offset the carbon pollution of that shipment by planting the box. Now that's kind of like a nice idea. You can do it yourself if you want to send someone a gift, and it's like a nice feeling to get a gift and then you plant a tree. But if you do that at scale, for the amount of boxes that we move, I mean, that's massive. Like, we know we have to plant billions of trees like every year to actually stop, the unraveling of our global weather systems and ecosystems. And actually we are positioned to do that by changing the Postal Service. And I just want to emphasize again, like, the way that business has changed, the amount of letter mail is way down, right, because of email, and that's reasonable. A lot of people, my generation, we don't really use letters that much, but packages are way up because that's how we shop now, right? We've seen, that technological shift where people shop online and it's cheaper, and Amazon exists, and et cetera. So the business is changing already. It's posed a challenge for the Postal Service in some ways, but there's no inherent problem there. We just have to change with the times. I mean, we could use the resources we have to do something that's incredibly necessary that I think the public is really hungry for. And that's, do the green energy revolution and, pursue aggressive decarbonization. And sorry if this is a little chopped up, but to continue the idea about the having like seed boxes, I think rapidly, if we actually did that at the scale that we need to, people would run out of space. You can't just plant, 1,000 trees in your front yard or something like that. But I think because, this has to happen through Congress anyway. We could set up, say, areas in national parks or national forests where they're designated areas where people can go plant these trees. And if individuals don't do it, like some people get, a dozen packages every week, there's no way they're going to do all that. We could have a new type of carrier that doesn't carry letters, they carry these seeds. Or maybe rural carriers, when they're out on their routes, have places where they stop maybe once a week and they actually do the planting. It's not hard to imagine how this could be done. We have like, 500,000 employees, somewhere in that ballpark. And we process the payroll for all these people. We have huge processes for hiring. We have civil service testing. So if you want to go into maintenance, or you want to be trained as an electrician, you can go through the Postal Service and do that. I feel like we could use that resource and say, well, we need to train how many people to put up solar or wind. Well, let's use this infrastructure, and let's use these training programs and just funnel people through this existing institution. And one other thing I want to mention, the sort of ongoing threat of privatization that I think every postal service faces, internationally. Some are private already. It's something that we've just sort of lived with in this country for decades, and we're so used to the concept of privatization and just sort of playing defense against it. And it's part of our discourse and our language, but we don't actually know what's the opposite of that. Like if the political opponents we have want to privatize everything, what does it mean to do the opposite? How do we make things more public, more oriented towards the public good? And people will sometimes talk about the commons, and sometimes they say, well, we're commoning, we're taking things out of private use and sharing them. And I just learned this interesting bit of history that, back in like the 1910s, they would call that postalization. Because the Postal Service was seen, the Postal Service was seen as this amazing public resource that was extremely efficient. It was basically free. It was extremely low cost, and so they were postalizing, for example, the interstate railway system. Like Amtrak now, or interstate or inner city rail cars and things like that. They called that postalization. So it's really no surprise that people are so angry at the Postal Service that, corporations and people who ideologically would prefer, managerial dictatorship, they don't like that, there's this model of a public service that actually has been inspiring, basically throughout its lifetime. So it's an ideological battle to say that, we are backward, that public institutions can't be innovative. We're not prickly and tough and forward looking like the people who are just building oil rigs until they get flooded out, and then I don't know, they'll move into their like underground bunker or go to Mars. So pretty much out of time. That's mostly what I wanted to say. I think that I'm really interested in the question of how can we really do this? What's it going to take as far as organizing and inside and outside? And, I'm interested to hear what other people have to say about that. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was, so many really exciting ideas. Definitely testifies to the fact that workers know best how to take their jobs and make them, serve everybody. And I love the idea of postalization being a synonym for anti-privatization. That's really powerful. Oh, sorry, Bruce. Postalization is great, and we love it. Julie, I'm going to pass it to you, and feel free to take 15 minutes or a little more, because we're doing great on time.
Okay, great. Thank you. First of all, I just want to say a couple of things. It's really nice to see Kate, my sister postal worker from the West Coast, CUPW. and familiar faces like Jamie Partridge. It's nice to see that Jamie's here. I want to thank Claire and Mindy for inviting me to be here to speak on this really exciting subject. And I wanted to say to Stephen that, you know, being a postal worker for 2 years, it's people like yourself that continue to push for change, whether that's within our own institutions or, you know, within government or whatever. So we very much need some fresh ideas. I know Kate is a young postal worker, and I'm really excited to see what she can do in the future. So I am Julee Sanderson. I'm the first National Vice President to the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, and I'm coming to you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I'm grateful and wish to recognize my privilege for speaking to you today from this territory in Gatineau, Quebec in Canada. First, I'd like to say that as your neighbors to the north, how proud CUPW is of the role the U.S. postal workers played in ensuring democratic freedoms to vote were protected in your presidential election. So that said, CUPW represents 55,000 workers throughout Canada. We like to think that although we're small, we punch above our weight. We have a long and really proud history of militancy and struggle for better working conditions and protections. And we have a long list of progressive and social policies that set our union apart from many others in the struggle for social justice here in Canada and abroad. The vast majority of our members are employees of Canada Post, which is a public state-owned crown corporation, meaning it is to operate and be self-sufficient, not reliant on public money to function. Basically, the expectation is that the post office generate enough revenue to support its entire operation. Canada Post operates under the Universal Service Obligation and has a 5-day delivery with an exclusive privilege on letter mail. History's proven to postal workers that Canada Post has had very few innovative ideas that would expand services. They've relied on and placed most of their eggs in the Jeff Bezos Amazon basket. But as we know, Amazon is looking to expand its own delivery network and are moving first really fast to get there. With the knowledge that Amazon will win the race for delivery with ZEVs, with the purchase of 100,000 vehicles on the road by 2030, the Postal Service has a long way to go if it wants to compete. And in Canada, postal workers are really tired of waiting for corporate executives to make any progress move to save pieces of delivery that's not protected by that universal service obligation. CUPW has had some accomplishments in the last few years in the fight to win better public services, and have used a model of, I guess you would call it sort of coalition building to put a workers' agenda at the forefront. In 2011, 10 full years ago, it's hard to believe, postal workers placed contract demands before Canada Post in line with the union's policies and protecting the planet. And we've continued to do that at each subsequent round of collective bargaining. Although we officially launched Delivering Community Power in 2015, the work began on developing the idea of expansion with a goal to reduce the environmental footprint of Canada Post, protecting the future of the post office, and to reimagine the work that we do. Well, in 2013, Canada Post implemented its 5-point action plan, which would reduce services and delivery to the door for millions of Canadians and result in job loss for thousands of postal workers. We believe that this was the first of several steps to privatize this important public institution. And in our view, the plan didn't pass the smell test. The CEO of the corporation at the time was Deepak Chopra, so not to be confused with the author. He was appointed by then Conservative government led by Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper had a long list of publicly owned companies that during his leadership at the National Citizens Coalition, I think it's called, he previously committed to privatizing. So the hostility towards public services from the Conservative government was really obvious. If he didn't outright privatize public services, his government's priorities and policies can be traced back to increased privatization during his terms in office. We knew that the path forward for Canada Post, for Canadians and for workers, was to fight for the future of a green post office. And we pushed governments to stop conversions from door-to-door delivery to these shitty ass group mailboxes. And we reminded them of their important framework of this trusted public institution. And that's how we framed it. We needed to stop the conversion to group mailboxes and reframe the discussion that people were having about the post office. And like most campaigns, of course, membership involvement is crucial for the success of that. To mobilize members and to raise awareness, we created campaign coordinators, and these positions were specifically dedicated to this issue and to build a broad coalition of support for our campaign. The coordinators were postal workers themselves, in fact, and they had a vested interest in the success of the work that they did. Together, they reached out to seniors groups representing people with disabilities, and small associations. They reached out to other unions to get their support. Another important partner were small towns across the country, communities that are impacted by bank closures and lack of access to services. In fact, I had mentioned Kate earlier, and if there are other coordinators on this call, I apologize, but Kate is one of the current campaign coordinators to fight for a better and just postal service. So ultimately, our target then was elected representatives. We wanted them to feel the heat. We knew that any effort to privatize or neuter the post office would be met with serious opposition. In 2015, a Liberal government was then elected, headed by Justin Trudeau. We considered this a partial victory. It wasn't a Harper government, but it wasn't an NDP government either, which is the Canada's equivalent to the most left-leaning. We helped build public pressure, and the newly elected Liberal government committed to a moratorium on the previous plan to eliminate door-to-door delivery. So the Postal Service became a true litmus test for the federal election, and we made sure it was on the ballot, and politicians reacted. Even conservatives were coming out supporting door-to-door delivery near the end, but their fate had already been sealed. We learned a really valuable lesson and committed to expand on this momentum, and in 2015, CUPW officially launched the Delivering Community Power campaign, which Stephen talked about. We continued to lobby the electoral representatives and engage the public to submit letters and to call on those representatives, because the fight, we knew, was not over. We needed to win expanded services and the greening of the post office. The message for our campaign was not fighting against something, but rather it was about putting our vision of the future forward, and it was about developing motherhood statements and the ideas that people couldn't argue with. They weren't wrong. Delivering Community Power is about a 21st century postal service and what that should look like. And, you know, we asked ourselves, what if our cherished national institution with this vast infrastructure and millions of daily human interactions could offer something completely different? What if the post office could play a central role in building our next economy, an economy that's more stable, more equitable, less polluting? And we were thinking really big. Postal facilities retrofitted with solar panels, a clean, renewable, energy-powered postal fleet that eliminates an estimated 65 kilotons of CO2 annually. Door-to-door mail carriers checking in on seniors and people with mobility issues, as well as delivering locally produced food and other public services. The post office that acts as a community hub for digital access and social innovation, connecting communities and climate-friendly businesses to customers. Postal banking services that provide inclusive financial services like loans to those underserved by commercial banks, by payday lenders, the money marts, etc., addressing inequities in Indigenous and rural communities. Public interest financial services that fuel green energy transition in urban, rural, and Indigenous communities alike. Public access electric charging stations at over 6,300 postal locations across the Canada Post network, where installation will occur on eco-friendly power grids. We want 100% renewable economy that addresses inequity, puts power in the public hands, and improves our lives. So delivering community power is really about a progressive vision of the future. It's about creating good paying jobs. It's about creating or building a strong sense of community. It's about living in a way that prioritizes the planet for our children and our grandchildren. When CUPW heard of plans for the Green New Deal, which ignited such a spark in the just transition movement, we knew that we were on the right path. We messaged to our members, to the public, and to the government that Canada must sign on. In that same vein, CUPW sent a delegation to COP25, the United Nations or UNFCCC climate talks in Madrid, Spain. And I was fortunate enough to go and be a part of that group. CUPW took part in demonstrations during the conference and walked with millions in the streets of Madrid demanding climate solutions, commitments to loss and damage, and global commitments of no more than 1.5 degree increases of pre-industrial levels to planetary warming and by our international leaders. Is really super exciting. The conference was a failure though, and on many fronts, and many pointed out that it was because of governments like yours and mine that blocked progress to avoid any responsibility of big polluters, which further weakened an already too weak Paris Agreement. So COP26 has been delayed due to COVID, we all know, but it's scheduled to take place in Glasgow, Scotland from November 1st to 12th. World leaders will be in attendance and announcing commitments for their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. Those world leaders will hear from civil society organizations and groups and will have lots of pressure to meet these commitments as the world continues to warm and destructions of our ecosystems and flooding and fires and storms and drought and, no stoppage of human suffering we anticipate would be on the rise. So now as postal workers, we have to think we can't solve these huge issues, but we certainly have a part to play. All workers have a part to play, but especially workers in carbon intensive industries. We work in transportation and logistics and in warehousing. Transportation, we know alone is responsible for between 15 and 20% of CO2 emissions globally. CUPW is working with our allies to advocate for the Green New Deal, and we want solutions that care for our planet, safeguard workers and their families, keep seniors, people with disabilities, and others safe, respecting Indigenous people, and defending a public service and social policies. While most solutions for substantial reductions in carbon rely on provinces and territories, as well as Quebec here in Canada, to make those commitments and shift away from high carbon emitters, our federal government has a unique opportunity to use federally owned infrastructure to make significant shifts. Here in Canada, the Liberal government introduced a new piece of legislation this past November called Bill C-12. Once it's enacted, the intent is to have transparency and set and achieve targets for net zero emissions by 2050. With average decline in CO2 emissions of no less than 20 megatons annually. CUPW plans on taking part with or without Canada Post. That's, I guess, going to be up to them. And we'll be making public submissions calling for a swift replacement of the Canada Post fleet with zero emission vehicles, the retrofitting of all bricks and mortar facilities, solutions for rural and forgotten Indigenous communities, and training for our workers to care for and maintain this new infrastructure. And CUPW is committed to putting environmental, social, and economic solutions forward to our lawmakers. We need to make sure that spending from all levels of government builds necessary infrastructure for zero carbon, full employment economy. It would be reckless not to invest now to keep our families and communities safe, especially when the solutions to climate change can happen and in the process create hundreds of thousands of good new jobs. With this in mind, CUPW's not going to wait for lawmakers or corporate executives to find ways for us. Therefore, we've developed a series of pathways to success with tools to promote this vision. And I'll just quickly go over those. We've built a partnership with civil society organizations, as I mentioned, a dedicated website with content development by digital campaigners and our amazing CUPW communication staff workers. We now have 9 campaign coordinators across much of Canada and Quebec. We're developing videos for education and Facebook. As well, we're developing a Twitter messaging plan, which includes the buy-in from national leaders. We've partnered with environmental organizations and signed on to the Just Recovery Principles Framework. We've been working with influential organizations such as the David Suzuki Foundation, who's come out and endorsed our plan, the LEAP, Naomi and Seth Klein. Stephen, you mentioned World War II types of posters. I would encourage you to read Seth Klein's new book, where he sort of makes the distinction between what's happening here globally and draws the parallel lines between this and World War II. Interesting. So we're working on the adaptation of a digital post office. This is really exciting, with full services of the Delivering Community Power plan. And this digital post office, when launched, will be integrated into current popular video game platforms currently being played by children and preteens, thus making the future post office more of a reality for generations to come. We've worked with academics and other unions to build this plan and have designed as co-applicants several environmental grants, one called Work in a Warming World and another called Adapting Canadian Workplaces. We concluded a survey of over 120 other postal unions to see how they are addressing the climate crisis. We've developed our own data collection so we can quickly connect with supporters using digital tools like Nation Builder to develop quick access and online platforms. We rent booths at trade shows, speak at events, hold town halls, meet with MPs and MLAs, those are the government bureaucrats. And very importantly, we're prepared to hit the streets to fight for a better, more inclusive post office. We've developed education materials and workshops that we offer to our members, share at plenaries, and share with Canada Post. We recognize that we need to improve the level of climate literacy at all levels. This vision of our program demands at the bargaining table with Canada Post and postal workers, and we're committed in this next round of collective bargaining, which unfortunately begins shortly, to place these matters back in front of the corporation. Well, in 2018, we were once again stripped of our right to strike. We referred our environmental demands to the federally appointed arbitrator after we had faced back to work legislation. In her ruling, Arbitrator McPherson instructed Canada Post to work with us on environmental issues, including examining the reduction of emissions in fleet, products, and work processes. Since the arbitrator's award, we've worked with Canada Post on the development of an environmental action plan, a materiality assessment, identifying and measuring scope emissions from buildings and from all forms of transportation in the delivery network. Canada Post has developed a corporate social responsibility report with input from its unions, the joint initiative letter, and the development of a global reporting index. Together, we're working on a financial services pilot project with any profits being reinvested into the corporation. We're jointly planning the development of local committees and environmental training, and we're working on waste and pilot reduction initiatives. We're modeling EV delivery in major urban downtown cores and working on pushing these services right across Canada. Lastly, plans are in the works for charging station pilots. This last point is to pursue elected representatives, of course. The fact that the post offices are everywhere and often the only federal government building in many communities is a great asset to use to better serve communities and with the services that they need. So Delivering Community Power is a campaign that puts our union in a proactive mode. We're fighting for bread, but we're fighting for roses too. As workers, we want dignity and we demand respect. We're experts at providing support during periods of transition, and we're uniquely positioned to protect working class struggles to find their place in this rapidly changing employment landscape. So we're thinking big. Thank you, and McWitch.
Amazing. That is so inspiring. There's obviously so much common ground between our two countries, and it is a great reminder of how much workers across borders need to be talking to each other. I could say a lot, but I'm not going to. Let's move on to David. David, you have 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's been great to hear from the brother from the letter carriers in Portland and from the sister from the very, very progressive CUPW union up in Canada, who we've worked with in the past, and I have a lot of respect and admiration for their efforts. I'd just like to start off by saying that the American Postal Workers Union represents 100,000 postal workers and retirees, clerks, maintenance, motor vehicle operators, and the people who repair the motor vehicles. Our union has made efforts to bring together a big coalition called the Grand Alliance to Save the Public Postal Service, which includes a lot of both unions and nonprofit organizations and public interest and environmental organizations as well. And we've also been participants in the Labor Network for Sustainability. We had I was part of a presentation at our last national convention in 2018, and we invited our delegates to talk about their experiences regarding climate change. We heard a number of people who were affected by the forest fires that had swept across California in 2018, and which were not as bad as the ones that were experienced in the subsequent years, unfortunately. And we heard from folks who were flooded out. Their homes were completely destroyed by torrential rains and floods in Louisiana. So members, we had a big member survey just to talk about people's experience with climate change, and so many people had personal loss or knew of people in their family who'd experienced major losses from climate change, which in 2018 was not nearly as bad as it was in 2020 and possibly in future years. So I'd like to kind of start off by talking about the U.S. Postal Service and an article I wrote titled "How the Postal Service Pretends to Fight Climate Change," which tells you what my opinion is of their efforts. They've got a really glossy booklet on their sustainability efforts, and they put in a lot of wonderful statistics. So let me go over a few of those with you. First of all, the Postal Service has a fleet of 228,000 vehicles. And they brag about how 20% of their fleet are alternative fuel or alternative fuel capable vehicles, 20%, okay? But almost all of those are vehicles that can potentially run on ethanol E85 gasoline blend, which is not very sustainable. On top of that, they don't actually run on that blend. They're just capable of doing it. So in fact, the Postal Service has a fleet which has almost no vehicles that don't burn fossil fuel. And they brag about their increasing use of alternative fuels. In an 8-year period, they doubled their use of alternative fuels, which sounds impressive, except that the total of all alternative fuels used in 2013 was the equivalent of 2 million gallons of gasoline, while the postal fleet itself used 154 million gallons of petroleum, and the postal contract fleet, the over-the-road drivers, used 560 million gallons. So you can see their use of alternative fuels was literally a drop in the bucket. And they set these ambitious targets to decrease their use of petroleum. So for example, they set a goal of decreasing their petroleum use by 20% from 2005 to 2015. Instead of decreasing by 20%, their fuel use increased by nearly 20%. So they went from 144 million gallons in 2005 to 186 million gallons of petroleum use in 2018. So obviously they talk a lot about what their accomplishments are, but their actions really are quite the opposite. But this is actually a moment of great opportunity to change that, because the greatest number of postal vehicles are, of course, the delivery vehicles you see in the street, which carriers drive. And many of them are reaching the end of, some of them are called long life vehicles. They've been around for 25 or 30 years past their useful life, and some of them catch fire. They're so old and antiquated. And so the Postal Service is in the process of, as has been mentioned, ordering, I think it's 160,000 vehicles in a $6 billion contract. There are 3 contenders. One of them is Workhorse, which is an electric vehicle manufacturer solely, which has produced, they have a contract for 5,000 medium package delivery vans already awarded to a company called Pritchard. And they're one of the 3 finalists for this contract. And so this is a major capital investment. And it's an opportunity to really put the Postal Service on a pioneering path to have electric vehicles as the mainstay of the delivery fleet. And of course, we have Amazon also announcing their purchase of the 100,000 vehicles by 2030, electric vehicles. And so we have a prospect in the future of people being presented with Amazon as the green alternative for the deliveries. And of course, deliveries post-pandemic will remain, I think, a mainstay of the way people acquire things. So delivery is going to be a huge portion of the carbon picture of the world, or of our country, certainly. And we don't want to have Amazon able to brag, if you want the green delivery route, you can ship through Amazon. Don't go to the Postal Service. Or competitors who don't have electric vehicles, right? And of course, Amazon treats their workers terribly, and they are not a very good corporate citizen, and they're in fact a model for siphoning income and wealth from the workers to the very few, including their executives and shareholders. So this is a very important moment for the Postal Service to make this decision, and one of the obstacles, I believe, will be the price tag. And if you have an electric vehicle, and I have a Chevy Volt, which is a plug-in hybrid, so it's not totally electric, but we bought it a few years ago. The price for electric vehicles is maybe $5,000 premium over a fossil fuel vehicle. But if you look at the math and you look at the cost of the fuel, over the long run, you actually save a lot of money. So unfortunately, the capital cost is a big hurdle, both for private people to buy this kind of vehicle and also for corporations. The Postal Service faces a cash crunch, partly because of the pre-funding requirement that maybe has been discussed, that there's a law that Congress passed that siphons $100 billion, or well, many billions of dollars to pre-fund the retirees' healthcare premiums in the future. There have been bills a bill to rescind that requirement was passed by the House of Representatives 2 years ago. Both the House and Senate have reintroduced this bill, and we hope that passes and takes the crunch off the Postal Service. But that alone won't be sufficient. There's both a capital problem, and there's a question of political will, and there's a question of who's leading the corporation. So we have Mr. DeJoy, who comes from the private sector, who is a big-time capitalist. He does not have a good labor record at the logistics companies that he's helmed in the past. He has all kinds of political problems associated with him, but he comes in as a cost cutter, and he plans to slash work hours, meaning cutting jobs, which of course would mean cutting service. And unfortunately, his model of the Postal Service is sort of the corporate one, where you have to make a profit. And I want to step back a minute and talk about the history of the Postal Service and how it came to have its current mission. Back in 2070, well, the Postal Service had been around since 1775. It was part of the federal government to provide services. It was not expected to make a profit any more than the roads department or schools were expected to make profits, right? However, prior to our unions having the right to collective bargaining, we were part of the federal government. We didn't have the right to bargain. The wages were terrible. 10% of postal workers, full-time workers in 1970 were eligible for food stamps and welfare. That's how bad things were. So in 1970, the nation's largest wildcat strike ever was conducted by postal workers, a fact which most people don't know or have forgotten. It actually wasn't led by the unions, but workers walked out and the unions followed. And there was a huge strike, pre-internet, obviously. This brought the country to a standstill. And after the troops were sent in to try and move the mail, they could not. Then a deal was made. The workers got collective bargaining, but the Postal Service was modernized in a way which, looking backward, was sort of a capitalist way of doing it. They had a board of governors, kind of like a corporate board of governors. Our postmaster general became postmaster general and CEO, and the Postal Service was expected to operate on a break-even basis over a 3-year cycle, which we always looked on as a good thing. We're not expected to make a profit. We're just expected to sort of bring in revenue to pay for what we do. And up until now, that seemed like a good concept. You know, we can brag that we don't accept tax subsidies, right? Well, the finance question kind of raises that whole model into whether that's the best model to look at. Because if we're supposed to make a profit or operate solely without taking into account the social good of what we do, then we're kind of no better than a corporation in terms of decision making. So I'm worried that the Postal Service will decide to take the cheaper route to save money, buy fossil fuel-based vehicles. We'll have this massive capital investment we can't get away from, and we'll be stuck as polluters for a long time, right? So I think the Green New Deal is a wonderful opportunity for us to push for electrical vehicles to become the basis of the postal delivery fleet. We've got some good things going for us. The new president, Biden, came out a couple days ago and said that he wanted the federal government to switch to a totally electric fleet in the future, not particularly counting the Postal Service. We're usually not counting such pronouncements, but that gives us a lot of hope. To the extent that electric vehicles will cost more, I think it will be appropriate as part of the Green New Deal for a large appropriation to be made, a loan or whatever, to finance the electric vehicles and to be able to carry the capital needs of the Postal Service for their vehicles and not make that a problem, and that down the road the Postal Service will reap the advantage of the fuel savings that they will benefit from. I know my fuel savings from switching from gasoline to electric have been substantial, and I expect the same for the Postal Service. So I think we have a real big opportunity. That's the big prize in my eyes. That's the #1 thing we should be pushing for. There are some other things that would be helpful for the Postal Service to look into as part of the Green New Deal. There's currently one major postal mail processing facility in Los Angeles that has I think 23 acres of solar panels on its roof. It's the largest solar facility in Los Angeles. And mail processing facilities run a lot of machinery, which is run by electricity. It only produces 6% of the power needs of the plant. Still, that's a very useful sort of example to look at. There are, I think, 4 other places: Springfield, Anaheim, South New Jersey, and in Washington, D.C. There are 4 other facilities where there are solar panel projects underway. But I think taking these off the postal budget and making them capital investments of the federal government with an eye to the public good would be extremely useful, both for generating electricity and also as kind of a model for the rest of society. One of the problems, of course, we face is that electric vehicles by themselves are not the solution, because renewable resources only constitute, I think, 18% of our electricity generation in the United States. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we're extremely lucky. The publicly owned Seattle City Light has approximately 96% renewable electric sources from windmills, mostly from hydropower. But here we would get almost 100% savings in terms of decarbonization if we switch to an electric vehicle fleet tomorrow. Obviously, the question of switching our electric sources is beyond the scope of the seminar, but switching our vehicle fleet to run on the basis of electricity is, I think, a very important first step. And I would add a note of caution. So as far as my union goes, in our internal politics, my local and our state organization passed a resolution in 2019 in favor of the Green New Deal, and our 2020 convention sadly was postponed until October this year due to the obvious pandemic. So we did do that very positive step. Back in 2016, we introduced a resolution to move the Postal Service to having an electric vehicle fleet. It seemed like a no-brainer at the time, but we didn't do our homework. And it was actually voted down by our national convention, which the reason for that, our mechanics are part of our motor vehicle division, and they service our postal fleet. And one of these selling points, one of the advantages of electric vehicles, there's fewer moving parts. They're much easier to maintain. There's less maintenance. And that was in our resolution. And our maintenance employees who rely on that for their sustenance and for their wages looked at that and said, you mean there'll be fewer jobs? We don't want that. And there are also issues about training because electric vehicles are totally different, they're very dangerous in a different way from the dangers with sort of dealing with gasoline. And they require special training, and the vehicle maintenance employees were very discouraged. They weren't getting the proper training from the Postal Service to do the jobs they had right there. And they had no confidence in the process that they would get training for the new job. So you have a microcosm here of the issue of transitioning to a cleaner fuel economy in the Postal Service itself, in our internal union politics, right? So we have workers afraid of losing their jobs, even though they work for the Postal Service, because of this proposed transition to cleaner fuel. So that's very much a cautionary tale. And then a couple more things I'd like to mention. This is a minor thing maybe, but we have rules that make it difficult for employees to transfer, and you can transfer within the Postal Service. And a lot of people I've talked to have tried to get transfers because they're commuting an hour each day or 2 hours each day to their good paying postal jobs, right? And so this is, a problem to have built in the system like this. If they can more easily transfer to their town's postal service, postal station and work there instead of, some of the other issues. And partly this is a collective bargaining issue, so it's less of a public issue, but this is something that I think would need to be tweaked and is really entirely to the employee's benefit, and they could clearly see those benefits. I'd like to throw in there one more issue of things that the Postal Service could do, of a service the Postal Service could provide that's been a big issue. Rural broadband access is a big, big issue in politics, especially in red states, so we have a lot of support in rural areas because the Postal Service is a lifeline for people in rural areas. There have been proposals to bring broadband access through rural post offices. There's one in every community to rural residents. And I think that idea has not been given enough attention. As part of a Green New Deal, we could have the government provide, as a utility, low-cost broadband to people in those areas, and that would provide a funding, however you fund it is sort of less important than the fact that you're providing that service. So that's kind of my spiel, and so I'd like to turn it over back to you.
Great, thank you so much, David. Wow, there is obviously no shortage of ideas around this topic. I just want to thank our speakers again for contributing their ideas. For the rest of our time, which is about 20 more minutes, we'll be doing a Q&A. For participants who are here and have questions for all of our speakers or for a speaker in particular, you can put yourself on stack, which means writing the word stack, S-T-A-C-K, in the chat, and I'll kind of call on you in order of people who volunteer. If you have a question and it looks like we're kind of winding down on time, you can also put your question directly in the chat, and either I'll read it out loud, or speakers, if you'd like, you can write directly into the chat in response to people's questions. But people should feel free to ask any questions of our speakers. And while we're kind of waiting for volunteers, I'll maybe talk about a couple of things that I found particularly interesting and promising in this conversation to get the conversation going. And I guess, as I said before, obviously there is a lot that the USPS can do, and our friends in Canada are definitely showing us the way there. which is really exciting. Some of the ideas that I heard, obviously converting the mail truck fleet is kind of top of the list. Being able to put electric vehicle stations in rural areas, as well as using postal stations to connect rural areas with the internet seems really promising. Stephen brought up this idea of plantable boxes and being able to actually dedicate public lands so that when we have plantable boxes, we have something to do with them, which is great. The idea of expanding USPS duties to check in on seniors, to check in on the homebound. I've heard other proposals for integrating home health aides into the USPS's work, or even social workers, to kind of expand what we're doing when we visit people's homes. And then the idea of delivering local food to people through the USPS is really promising. So, another big idea that I heard from folks was, getting out of defensive mode and actually articulating a vision that people are excited about, that we can organize people towards, as opposed to simply being anti-privatization, anti-whatever latest thing our government or the competition like Amazon is doing. And another kind of last point is something that Julie said, I think, very well, which is that all workers have a part to play. And, whether that form of participation and contribution is, waging, maybe a war, not a war, but fighting with union leadership over priorities by kind of mobilizing the rank and file within your own union, whether it's talking across ranks to make sure that the mechanics are also being thought of and taken care of, so that all workers are on board. It seems like there's a lot to think about in terms of the actual organizing on the ground. So I'll throw it to Jamie, who has a question.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes, fabulous. Julie, can you talk with us about how CUPW builds coalitions with community, rural, senior, faith, indigenous, student, political organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America? How do you go about doing that and mobilizing that power?
Thanks for the question, brother. And I did see it in the chat box. I wasn't sure if I was going to get called on to answer it because there's a lot of great questions out there. In terms of, coalition building, I really think that, first of all, it's been something that we've been doing for a really long time. Well, at least for 10 years we've been doing it. But we made the determination that instead of telling people what the post office needed to be to them, if you go to people and say for example, when people were, the government was looking and Canada Post was looking to alter door-to-door delivery, if you go to people and say to them, do you like your door-to-door delivery? They're going to say, yeah, but, a lot of people are going to respond that, I don't mind the CMBs, but you have to ask people what's important to them, and then that starts a conversation. So much like politicians do, unfortunately, when they go to doors and talk to people, it's about having one-on-one conversations. It's about ensuring that our membership knows what we're talking about. So it's not just leadership and, like the fiefdom talking to the little people and saying, this is what needs to be important to you. It was talking with members about what was important to them and building up their confidence so that they could go out and have conversations with their friends, with their coworkers, with the organizations, the groups that they go out to. Do they go to church? Do they belong to an Indigenous organization? Do they have a community group? And have those conversations, put those conversations about the future of the postal service, because you know what, most people are concerned about our planet and concerned about the future of our planet, concerned about, if you're not concerned about the planet, you're really concerned about what sort of world is going to be left for future generations. So I think that's what it was for us, is just the sky was the limit. Reach out to everybody. I know when I was once on the road for 3 months, driving from town to town to town, talking to postal workers. And so I would go into the workplace, talk to postal workers about what we were fighting for. I had delivering community power was a subject matter, fighting to maintain our defined benefit pension plan was another subject matter, and negotiations. And I felt as though those 3 topics touched on really specific points that were important to postal workers. And from the letter carrier depot or the plant, I would then go to the city, the town, the municipality, and ask to have a meeting with counselors, anybody that would listen to me. I'd go through the phone book or my laptop or whatever, and I would find places in town that might be interested to hear our message. One of the most unique things that we did while I was on the road is we stopped in an Indigenous community and talked to a band and chief and council. And I just said, listen, I'm not Indigenous. I'm not here to tell you, I'm not here as a settler to tell you what Indigenous people need, but I want to hear from you. What is it that you're lacking? What are the services that you need? And I think if you approach things in that way and frame it that you're not there to get something from somebody, which most people are, like most politicians are, but in fact, you're there to offer something new and something substantial. That's the way to do it. Thank you.
Oh, Claire, can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. It looks like I missed a question from Kevin Robinson in the chat, so I'll read it out loud for him. His question is, how can Canadian and US public sector unions act in solidarity with each other? And that's for anyone who wants to answer it.
Well, I'll start, although I just spoke, but I know Jamie because I've met Jamie before. And it's important to CUPW. We do a lot of work on the international level, I guess I would say, like whether there's a variety of issues. I shared a link to our social policies in our constitution. So we speak out on a variety of issues that sometimes really touch the nerve of people, but it gets people talking. I'm also going to share my email address, and if people are interested in reaching out and continuing to explore these conversations where we can talk amongst ourselves and share tools that we have, share things that we found to be successful, and things that we have found to not be successful. We don't want you all to repeat the silly ass mistakes we've made, but and we've made a few. But yeah, I'll share my email address if people are interested, and I'll share them with people like Kate and the other 9 coordinators that are doing this really important work. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I just like to say, I know when we have our national conventions, the unions have sent sort of officers to each other's conventions to talk and perhaps address the delegates of the national convention. But back for about the year 2000 to 2010, here in the Pacific Northwest, we actually, the APW, local APW and the CUPW based out of Vancouver, we were having cross-border trainings. The International Solidarity Weekend is what we called it. And we had, we took turns hosting, we alternated, and we're not that far away. So we would drive up one year, they would bus down another year, and we would have different workshops, and we would compare our, this is the sort of closer to the rank and file level. It's more like officers or delegates or just interested parties who invited anybody to attend who was a union member. We discuss our work floor experiences and the sorts of conditions we were undergoing in the in our shops and the problems we had, discuss solutions and see what the other unions were doing about certain things. I've also met a lot of the CUPW folks over the years at the labor notes conferences in Detroit or Chicago, wherever they're held over the years. And that's also been a very good place for meeting postal workers, not only from Canada, but from other countries.
I don't have a real answer for this, but I had this bizarre idea, mostly tongue in cheek. What if we had a Postal International? You have to unmute, Julie. I think it'd be great. I don't know. We could have an international strike fund. We could have conferences, talk about the Green New Deal. I mean, if you have a survey of over 100 postal services and what they're doing about climate change, I feel like you've already laid the groundwork.
I'm like shaking my hands in the background going, oh, I can't believe I forgot that. CUPW is actually planning a session. Right now we're thinking it's going to be virtual, but we're planning a session in September calling on postal unions to show up at this session. We're actually, part of the session will incorporate employers as well, because employers, they have to buy this stuff. They have to buy what we're bringing to them. So anyways, the Postal Symposium, and we'll be sure to be sending out invitations to all of you great folks.
I feel like I'm watching history being made. Andrew is on stack. Andrew, give us your question.
Oh, hello. I just dropped it in the chat as text, but basically I was just wondering, for U.S. Postal Service organizers, I know that there's at least two contracts up on the federal level this year, and that there's going to be bargaining around those. So just as a DSA member, and I'm sort of wondering what we can do locally, and maybe in a more coordinated way to help bring these demands into the contract negotiations.
So Jamie would actually be much better at answering this than me. I know that, yeah, the NALC, we do have a contract that we have our ballots and we're going to be voting on it. Nationally, it's probably just too short of a timeline to really influence it. We've been trying to get people to vote no. It's really not a very good deal. But our union sort of is just ramming this through. We don't have much opportunity to even discuss the contract and what's in it. But there are local negotiations we'll have if it's approved, and then we actually can get things there. So I'm sure there's some opportunity for supporting those local negotiations. And if Jamie wants to add to that, he can give some more detail.
Yeah, real quickly, can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, as Stephen said, each letter carrier branch, which are usually clustered around a city, is involved with local negotiations in the months following the settlement of the national contract. And if you reach out to your local letter carrier branch, find them in the online, something, get in contact with them and see what if they have any plans to push for some community related demands in their local negotiations, and see how you can make those public in putting pressure on local postal management to do the right thing. And I want to especially let Dave Yao speak to the National American Postal Workers Union contract campaign that's coming up in the next few months. Dave, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, so as far as the environmental aspect of the question, there's really not a lot in our contracts that covers the environmental question. We do have the issue of safe workplaces, which is somewhat related, and that's a big issue always, especially with COVID. The environmental, I think the unions can have certainly a say in addressing some issues publicly, but if there's a public campaign around, for example, getting the Postal Service to buy electric vehicles, I think it's much more politically effective if it's coming from the broader public, and having the union support that would be a big component. But I think we need to have a public campaign about that.
And similarly with our contracts, it was really heartening to see last year. I don't know if people know there were 1,100 rallies across the country in the month of June over the course of 2 different days, called by coalitions in defense of the Postal Service because of the perceived threat to the post office because of postal balloting, you know, and the threats from the former president and the Postmaster General's actions. And so it was really great to see in front of my local post office, 40 neighbors just show up with signs in support of protect the post office, protect your right to vote. So we have a lot of support for keeping a strong postal service. I think the bills in Congress, for example, ending the pre-funding and any move we have to fund postal efforts towards purchasing electric vehicles would be great in terms of taking financial pressure off the Postal Service. And the employer will often argue, we can't afford this, you know, so to the extent that the Postal Service's finances aren't fixed and fixed in a fair way, we will face, you know, tougher sledding in collective bargaining. As far as getting too much into the contract campaigns, you can go to apw.org and follow along, and they do have they will ask for member participation. There may be opportunities for the public to participate as well.
Great. We have about 5 minutes left, and by my count, we have 4 questions. So I'm going to read one question for someone that they wrote in the chat. And then if we can, just keep our answers relatively short, even though I know we could go on all day about these issues. The first question is from Raymond, and it's directed towards Stephen. And he just wanted to know if you could describe this phrase postalization one more time.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. So here's the source material, The Utopia of Rules by David Graeber. Excellent book. And this is in chapter Why We Really Love Bureaucracy After All. So it's like 2 sentences. I'll just give you the straight Graeber, and you can look it up. It says in the United States, there's a term, postalization, a unique American coinage for nationalization, and one that significantly has since completely disappeared from the language. Same time as Weber and Lenin were invoking the German post office as a model for the future, American progressives argued that even private business would be more efficient if it were run like the post office. So it goes on. It's very interesting. One note I should make about that last question. The pre-funding mandate is really the thing that is hurting, like, I think all the workers in the post office. They've created like an artificial shortage of funding, and that means that we don't get the wage increases we should get. You know, like they basically create these part-time flexible employees at the bottom. You know, before you become a career employee, you have to go through this like you know, flexible hell where you get, you know, shipped maybe an hour away one morning, and then you get shipped, you know, 30 minutes in the other direction the next morning. And you never know your hours. And so they're trying to balance the budget of the post office on the backs of workers because they're taking like $70 billion out of our operating budget for like no reason. They basically are just doing it to crush us and to push privatization. And one really interesting tidbit, I just got an email from another rank and file person yesterday about this. Apparently, the timing when they actually put in that pre-funding mandate was immediately after the post office first announced they were going to go to electric vehicles. Apparently that set off a lot of anger from the big oil companies, and then they made a very big push to make sure we couldn't afford something like that. And then they actually got it in place. So, you know, they definitely see us as a threat for, you know, pretty good reason. And really, probably the best thing to do to help our unions and our general working conditions, you know, in the near term is to get rid of that pre-funding mandate. And there is an effort to do that now. There's like a number of congressional proposals, and apparently Biden's open to it. So that's something that you could do. And you can also ask Jamie about it. He'll point you in 5 directions about how to do that.
All right, this actually might end up being our last question within time. I think we can stay a couple minutes late, but if folks need to go, they should feel free to. And this question is coming from Dave.
Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me now? Hi, Dave Stager. I'm in Kalamazoo, rural letter carrier, living in that flex hell that Stephen just mentioned. I had a question for Julie and then for everybody. Just more information about the coordinator mobilization setup that you have. It sounds like member-to-member mobilization, and just what that structure's like, and then how, if and how we can apply that in unions in the US toward the Green New Deal or toward our contracts.
Thanks for the question, David. So coordinators are postal workers. Each of our Canada is broken up into regions. Each region has a coordinator, and that coordinator reports to all of the work that they do to a regional sort of executive person, who then is supposed to coordinate or make the locals accessible to that coordinator. The coordinators then talk with locals at general membership meetings. They make partnership with organizations. So that coordinator, and then all of those coordinators work with a national coordinator who is coordinating all of the work that's being done, working on developing like petitions, getting signatures, adding names to data so that we can quickly, the data is the key. You want data so that you can quickly send out mass emails to all of your supporters and say, we need you to buy on here. Nation builder, nation builder, nation builder. Thanks.
David, are you looking to make a closing comment now?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I really like the idea from Vicky Sawicki in San Francisco. They're having local environmental committees of the workers themselves, which is great. And then also just to make sure people know about the Facebook page, Save Our Postal Service, which is a great source, daily curated of sort of a progressive angle on, or basically all the political news that affects the Postal Service, and there is a lot of it.
Great, let's hear from Jamie.
Oh, did I have my, oh, are you looking at my, did I have a stack, you mean? Was I in the stack?
Yeah, you put yourself on stack, but if we covered it already, that's also fine.
Oh, yeah, I'm just putting in the chat right now, the House and Senate bills called the USPS Fairness Act, which eliminates the pre-funding mandate for Postal Service paying retiree health benefits 75 years in advance.
Awesome, that's super important. So our last question today is going to come from Dennis, and Dennis, you have the floor.
Okay, I already made the point, and then David just made it as well. Come to the Save Our Postal Service page and like it, like in quotes with a capital L. Maybe you'll even like it. It's pretty useful. And I imagine that some of the people here came from, we promoted this event on it, as we have the previous DSA4USPS events and other things. So check it out, please, and comment and send us stuff.
Excellent. Okay, so that's one way that everyone on this call can support postal workers and support the Postal Service. But I think we, today talked about a number of organizing strategies that both people who work for USPS and for the Canadian Postal Service, as well as those of us who support can take on. I want to let everybody know that a recording of today's webinar will be available on YouTube and on the DSA website. Usually we turn them around in a couple days, but could be longer than that. And if you have any questions, you know, you can get in touch with the DSA4USPS committee. We're always looking for new DSA members and postal workers to join our work. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks again to our incredible panelists. This was such a substantial and inspiring conversation.